I was watching Tariq's show about the Moors, and I just want to address something that Tariq is wrong about, and that a lot of black scholars I think are wrong about, and it's the fact that the Moors never came to America. Now, this isn't a historical question, more so than it's a biological question, which is why is it that if the Moors did come to America before the Europeans, how come the Moors didn't give the natives smallpox and measles and all those other viruses that the Europeans and the Moors would have had? The Moors and the Europeans commingled together for over 1,000 years. So if the Moors are going back and forth trading with the natives in the New World centuries before the Europeans, then the Moors would have passed on the same viruses that the Europeans passed on, and you would have had a mass die out of the native populations from contact with the Moors. But that didn't happen. There's no recorded mass disease die outs of the natives until the whites came, you know, and that's a simple biological question. So it's kind of like, how the Moors, how the Moors didn't come to the New World is because there were no diseases. It's not like the Moors came and there was a big, huge uh, breakout of all these diseases, and then in generations' time, the natives built up immunity. Because if that were the case, then when the whites came, the natives would have been good. They would have been good, and also there's the question of the weaponry too. I mean, we know the weaponry that the Arabs had, the Moors, and we know the weaponry that the natives had. Even if the natives had metalworking, which in some ways they did, they never really used. They didn't use metal weapons like that. Now, I'm not really sure why that is or how come they didn't, but they did, and that was very costly to them when they went against the European. So I just don't see how the Moors are trading with the natives centuries before the European, and they're not sharing that technology with them. Or at least the Moors or the natives don't see the importance of that technology, even if it's not a part of their, way of war. I mean, even the same thing with the horses. There's cavalry. So once again, trading that stock and technology to the natives is something that I think the Moors would have done if they were trading centuries before the European. But again, there's no record of that. And I don't really go by a historical record because history is propaganda and people lie and they lie on both sides, you know. And there's no reason to lie about a history of a people like the Moors. You know, I just see it as a lie when you say that the Moors were in America before the whites, because the biological record says that's impossible. You know, how is it that the Moors didn't give the natives these diseases, but the whites did? And mind you, the whites and the Moors were side by side. So it makes no sense when you say, oh, the Moors were centuries here before. And I'm sure you could find things. I'm sure there were probably Moors who were like shipwrecked and all that stuff, you know, and there may have been shipwreck documents that they get. There's some things that I can't really account for. But the one thing I can account for is the biology. And the biology says that, you know, the Moors would have been just as capable of passing off a virus just as much as the whites were. You would have gone to the New World if you were a Moor and traded with these people, and then gone back to Spain or wherever, and then come back to the New World, and those people would have been gone, wiped out. It didn't take a lot of Europeans to wipe out mass empires of the native world. It didn't take a lot of them. It was like 300 of them, 400 of them. So I don't believe that the Moors were here before the European, just from a biological point of view. How could they be? If there's no, if the Moors are trading like that, they would have passed that disease along, all those diseases. And history would have actually been much different because then the native would have been like, if that were the case, then centuries later, the natives would have actually stood a chance against the Europeans, meaning that uh, without the massive deaths, and if the Moors traded just some weapon technology to them, you know, show them how to smelt and make weaponry, it would have been a much more difficult fight for the Europeans to do what they have done if the Moors were there before the European. But it just no record that they were. I mean, there's no record that's concrete that they were. Like again, a biological record is concrete. We know what the viruses were. You know, that can't be faked or propagandized. That is what it is. It devastated the natives and it benefited the whites. But it would have benefited the Moors in a way if the Moors went to there to conquer. But even if they went there to trade, it would have benefited them anyway in terms of just taking their resources, not really having to trade anything. You got a huge town of dead people, but you got a land of plenty. I just don't believe that the Moors were doing that. And it's quite simple why they weren't doing that, why they didn't go to the New World. They were too busy fucking white women in Spain. That was it. Like, and this is just a part of the history that's pretty sad about the Moors. To be honest, the Moors were basically coons for the most part. It was a coon empire, basically. It's what would happen if the coons ruled? Well, the coons ruled, they would just take a little spot in Europe and ask for white women. That's what they did. They asked for white virgins whenever they conquered and conquered and conquered. And as tribute, they would have to give up white virgins. And eventually, the Moors got so far north in these three areas, forget their names, but at any rate, there was a big battle, and the Moors lost. And the battle reason why the Moors fought that battle was because those last Spanish kingdoms refused to give up any more of their virgins. They had to give up a certain number of white virgins, and that was basically the reason why they battled and the reason why they lost, because they didn't want to give up any more virgins. And eventually, they pushed them back. The Moors were too busy having these huge stables of white virgins. Well, they weren't virgins anymore. They were too busy doing that to focus on anything else. They were too distracted by that, and that's just the truth. Sure, they built nice cities and all that other shit, but in terms of exploring like that and conquering like that, they weren't about that. They were good. And even if they did go to the New World, what did they do? You know, I just don't see. I don't see why the Moors would be glamorized in any way. Just because you find a few blacks who are sprinkled throughout, you say, "Oh no," it's like it's not like that. If someone took a snapshot of our history right now in the United States, they would say, "Gee, it looks like blacks are actually doing pretty good. You got black senators, you got black this, you got black mayors, you got for minority people, they have a lot of representation." Statistically, if you were reading this history like 1,000 years and you didn't have video or anything, you just went by like numbers and things like that, you would make that conclusion. We know living in this world that that's total shit. Like, the politicians are coons, they're sellouts, they do nothing for black people, and it's totally fucked up. We know that. But if someone were living like 1,000 years or 2,000 years, and all they had were just like scant records of, you know, like scant statistical records, they would look at that and draw that conclusion. And it wouldn't be a bad conclusion to draw, but we live and know how it is. So when I look at all these blacks sprinkled throughout the Maghreb, I think that's what they call it, it just doesn't impress me. It's like, well, yeah, they're probably just coons, you know, and they were, just like it is today. It wouldn't be any different back then than it is today. We have coons today in high positions, coons today who are picked out by the dominant society. And at that time, it was the Arabs. The Arabs ran everything, and yeah, they pick out the special Negro here and there, and that's what the Moors were. They were a mix of Arabs, and every now and then you have the special Negro. But they're nothing to be admired. It's not like they did anything to expand and explore. They stopped that once they got to Spain. That's the whole history of the Moors. It's just fucking white women. That was it. That's all they did. And it's not like something I mean, I really don't care to say, because the conception that somehow that black and Moor are like foundation of black American and Moor are the same is total bullshit. That's total bullshit. Two entirely different peoples. You know. Yeah, eventually the Moors came to the New World with the whites, and they may have came before, like I said, the shipwreck and all that other shit. But that's so rare, it seems, because there were no diseases. So how is it that the whites were able to give the natives the diseases, but the Moors were not able to? There's just so much there that makes absolutely no sense to justify saying that the Moors were the first ones to come to the Americas before the whites did. Well, at least from a biological point of view. I mean, again, to argue all the little if and uts, all that stuff. Well, they spoke Arabic here and they were aware of this and they were aware of that. We don't know what the hell they were aware of. We don't know any of that shit. They might write this and write that, but that shit could be tampered with. We don't know. All we know is what we know about biology. Something that's on record and that we know can't be faked. You can't fake that biology. You can't fake a virus. You can't fake smallpox and the measles and all that other stuff that ravaged the Native American populations. I mean, you have these conquistadors, these European ones, coming with 300 men on like 8 ships or whatever, just marching through all over Mesoamerica, doing their thing, conquering along the way. Sure, they had natives join them and everything, but just the fact that they were in armor, the weaponry, you know, it was obviously superior to what the natives had. And eventually the natives would adopt that weaponry. But I feel like if they were trading with the Moors for centuries before, they would have already seen that and said, oh, well, that's a good idea. How do you make those weapons? And they would have been able to advance further in like the smelting process to where they would have had like an Iron Age or something. I think they may have had like a Bronze Age, or maybe because they worked with gold and all that, but they didn't have like the true Arab, European, and eventually like sub-Saharan African smelting that produced like a true Iron Age and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's just no biological proof that the Moors were even in America from, again, a biological point of view, from a viral point of view. Not even speaking about, again, all the artifacts here and, they were speaking Arabic here and they were aware and what they told Columbus. We don't know what the fuck they told Columbus. You said, oh, Columbus was told and he put it in his journal. Columbus was a fucking liar. Columbus lied about everything. That dude was a compulsive liar to even get on that mission, that whole journey, that whole backstory. He lied. He lied about everything. So I don't believe shit he says. He was a fucking liar. That's all Columbus did was fucking lie. He lied for the support from the king and queen of, I think, Spain, that whole backstory. He was always lying. So him saying, yeah, I talked to the natives and natives said that they were blacks and blah, 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 blah. Bullshit. I don't believe any of that shit. Again, I can't. It's all propaganda. I can only believe just concrete, irrefutable shit. And that's why the biology point of view, that can't be faked. There's no bullshitting there. Again, all the journals and this and that, that's all bullshit. Like I said, people lie too much. They lied back then, they lie now. So to even take that as anything serious is fucking nutty. You can only stick to the history that, you know, if you're going to speak about it like that, that can't be misinterpreted or reinterpreted. Again, you can't misinterpret or reinterpret a disease. It is what it is. It's concrete. Either you get it or you don't. And the natives didn't have it if they were trading with the Moors. Well, we know that's impossible. At least it, at least if it were possible, then it would be impossible for the Europeans to come and then just wipe them all out because they have no immunity. But they would have had immunity if the Moors would have came first and they were wiped out and got the 30% survived. And 200 years later, when the Europeans did come, oh, well, you know, most of the people are immune to it. They're not falling out in the millions. So it's hard to believe that somehow the Moors have it, which they do, because the Europeans have it and they're living together. So they carry it just as much as the European does. I mean, the Black Death in Europe destroyed the Europeans, but also affected the North Africans as well, and the Asians in Central Asia. So again, it's going to have to be real concrete proof, unless you can prove how, or at least explain how the Moors didn't give diseases to the natives when they traded. How was that possible? But the Europeans did, just like that. And if we go by that narrative, the the mainstream narrative, then the Moors were traveling with the Europeans, and yet the only people who are going to die are just the natives. So again, it makes no sense. It's one of those, you know, let's feel good about ourselves, and we don't need to do that. That's not necessary. It's not necessary for us to pump ourselves up with bullshit. And the whole Moor thing is total bullshit. You know, everything I said is the truth about them. I mean, the majority of them that were black were coons. They didn't do a damn thing but sell out. They continually sell out. And when you read the history of the Moorish Empire, their decline is a continually selling out process, which is what coons would do if they were in charge like that. They continually sold out. That's what it was. They had no code. Well, they may have had it at one point, maybe. To be honest with you, they did catch the Spanish off guard, you know, when they did invade. And to be honest with you, when you read about the history, it's one of those strange things where the Spain in that area, the whites at least, they were able to have their little internal wars as well. But whenever they needed to press the offensive against the Moors, they could always call upon a crusade. Well, the Pope could. And the whites from all over Europe and stuff, Scandinavia, will all come to Spain and assist in their driving the Moors out of Spain and all that. But nevertheless, again, it was a continual process of selling out. They always sold out. They always sold out. They always sold out for tribute. And the main tribute that the Moors always got was virgin white women in the hundreds. And that was it. I mean, they had some other shit too, but It was the white women that they wanted, and that's what they got. They had it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's the sad truth, because as intelligent as the Moors they were, I find it hard to believe for 8, 9, 1,000 years, they're just not going to America. They're just not going. Which, yeah, they're not going because they're too busy fucking white women in Europe. That's what they were doing. Or in Spain. They couldn't help themselves. So yeah, as unbelievable as it is, that's what it is. Because if they did go, the natives would have been wiped out. 30% probably would have survived, which would have been enough. With like 200 years later, when the Europeans did come, say if things play out the same, and then the Moors lose to the Europeans, if that was the case, then the Europeans wouldn't have had an easy cakewalk with the natives. Because again, the diseases assisted the Europeans greatly because more natives were dying and more Europeans were coming. So when you think about it, for one dead native, you're probably having 2 or 3 Europeans. And these are just the Spanish Europeans. I'm not even speaking of like the English and the German and those Europeans, because once they came, they outbred the natives. That's how ravaging the disease continued to be. Eventually, the native population recovered from the disease, but by then they were at war with the whites, and they were on a whole different trajectory of annihilation at that point. But overall, but that again, it would be a different history if the Moors did go to the Americas first. They just didn't. You know, why bother? I mean, in their mindset, at least, why bother? They may have had maps and all that other bullshit, but they didn't go like that. Again, you may have had one guy shipwrecked, or one guy who went there and may have been able to come back, and they asked him, well, what's there? He would have been like, they're like Indians, you know? Oh, well, fuck it. I imagine that's probably how the conversation went if one did go there and come back. But it makes no sense that in 1492, literally 1492, once the Moors influence is totally slicked from Europe, that they explore it and get right there. You know, again, it makes no sense if the Moors were there first. It's just that they didn't go. As unbelievable as it is, which it really is unbelievable because they're coons. So yeah, they settled where they settled. And like a coon society, they continually sold themselves out until they had absolutely nothing left. And then allow the Spanish to come upon their soil and conquer it. That's real history. But it's not comfortable history for whatever reason, because there's some affinity between foundational Black American and the Moor, which there isn't one. It's totally two separate things. But that's all I want to say.